Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life, the radio show and podcast that brings you inspiring people with visions of a viable future for life on Earth that includes humans. That's us. Hi, I'm Baruch. Welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. Glad you're here. We have a wonderful episode. There's a lot of hard stuff in the world, and we address it sometimes. Sometimes we have to go light. We need a break from the heaviness. Not to deny it or ignore it, but just to feed ourselves. My guest on this episode is a very creative person who is, among other things, a musician and has released a double album set. Well, he's doing something that we haven't seen before. I think you'll really enjoy it. Let's meet my guest now on this episode of Paradigms. Ezra Gale, welcome to Paradigms.
Thanks for having me.
You are the Eargoggle.
That's right. You found me.
Very interesting. So you've got this, you've done a bunch of different things, but right now we're here to talk about this new double album set, double comic book set.
Right.
So what we've got is, the first one is called Regales.
Right.
And then the second one is Revels. So first, before we get into that, tell me about Ezra Gale and the Eargoggle. Who are you and what is the Eargoggle?
Well, I've been a musician, I guess, all my life, really, and played in bands and everything. And the Eargoggle is like my alter ego solo project. I've always been in bands and have been one of the songwriters and band leaders and everything, but I never had my own project where I didn't have to listen to anybody else's opinion. You know what I'm saying? So this kind of started, I started doing this on the 4-track cassette deck. I think the first album was 2015, I think maybe. And then I put another one out a couple of years after that. And so this will be the third one under my name, and they've grown in ambition each time. But basically it's just kind of, it's me taking all the things that I've been doing all my life. I was in an Afrobeat band for a long time called Aphrodisia, and we toured all over the world. And I've played lots of jazz, and I've played lots of Latin music and lots of other kinds of African music, rock, funk. I have a country band right now also. So I like a lot of things, and I've always been like that. So this is the Eargoggle to me was just kind of like, I'm gonna do whatever I want here. And I play a lot of instruments. Guitar and bass are my main instruments, but I play keyboards. And I'm a terrible drummer, but I can do it. Thankfully, most of the songs on this record are my awesome drummer friends playing drums. And I sing. And, again, thankfully, I got some amazing singer friends to also be on the album with me this time. So this is just, the Eargoggle is kind of my way of taking all these things and putting them all in the same stew, not saying, well, I can't do that because this is an Afrobeat band, or I can't do that because this is an indie pop band, So, this is like an anything goes kind of thing.
This music is sort of like new wave, psychedelic, surreal, a little bit of punk, ...
That's great. I'll take all those. That's great.
Because it's like all over the place, and it's really interesting. So, okay, so you play all these different instruments, and you have all these different flavors that you enjoy, and you're a human being, and you have life experiences. You put it all together for us here. It's an ambitious project. Firstly, it's a double album set.
Yes.
And you've got graphics to go along with it that are not incidental. They're really integral. What's the whole concept of this? What is this?
I guess you could say it's like a go big or go home kind of thing. I kind of ended up with this batch of songs. It was a lot of songs. Initially, it was going to be 2 records. The Regale is part of the Revels, but like the record 1 and 2, I was thinking of as different releases. And then I just decided, as it grew, I was like, I think it just makes more sense to have this all be one. And it kind of snowballed from an original, here's my songs and let me figure out how to release them, to okay, how can I get people to notice this? What can I do? To, wow, I've always been a comic book nerd, and maybe I can combine these things, which I never thought of doing before, partly fueled by this thing happening in March 2020 that shut everything down for me anyway, and kind of left me with like a lot of creative energy that was not being spent on playing gigs and other things, to really kind of just make this a bigger and bigger project. So I ended up with this batch of songs and really felt that the thing that united them, because they're all separate songs, it's not like a concept album or anything. The thing that united them was that it was a lot of narratives and a lot of stories, a lot of characters, which I haven't always done, but I just kind of noticed at this time that's what this was. So it was like, okay, well, the lyrics, I got to, make sure that the lyrics are kind of important here and spotlight them. And I was just kind of going through different ways to do that. And then I was like I said, I've always been a comic book nerd. So I was just like, what if the lyrics are a comic book, And I had no idea, absolutely none, how to do that, how to pull it off. So that was daunting, but I just kind of started chipping away and contacting people and then put me in touch with people and eventually ended up checking out all these amazing comic book artists' work and kind of saving their work in a little folder, and then started reaching out to them and explaining the project and going from there. And the whole thing, like I said, it just kind of snowballed. It kept getting bigger and bigger. I would always ask people like, hey, do you have anybody else that you think would be cool for this? And everybody was like, oh yeah, I work with this. Oh, you've got to get this girl. She's amazing. Put me in touch with other people. So that's kind of how it all started rolling,
That's the first part of my conversation with Ezra Gale, the Eargoggle. It gets more interesting. He's great. Let's hear something from the first disc of the Eargoggle, and then we'll be back with more of my conversation with Ezra Gale. This is called The Garden. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.
Is an envelope away. I just don't need
That's The Garden from disc 1 of the new double album set, The Eargoggle by Ezra Gale. It's like, kind of acid rock kind of music, right? It's got some serious bass and interesting vocals. Ezra plays in many styles, so we'll be hearing some different music from The Eargoggle after we get back to my conversation with Ezra Gale. Here we go. The songs are individual. It's not a concept album, but it feels like one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because of the comic books and the graphics and that there's this way in which it's all drawn together. So the interesting thing is then we can make up our own story about what this is a concept for. I'm going to have to work on that.
That's a good angle. Honestly, as I got into it, part of the other idea that was kind of motivating me was to kind of create this experience that was more than just a passive listening experience, because you get an album and you put it on and you listen to it and it's like, or you watch a movie and it's like it just kind of broadcasts one way. And this one I kind of was and am intrigued to see, like, what is your experience going to be? Like, you could read the book just as itself, and you could obviously listen to the music just alone. And how is that? Like, hopefully that works by itself, but then there's also maybe a different experience when you put the music on and look at the book, because the book is the lyrics, So I'm kind of like just wanted to see, like, making the listener a more active participant in this, maybe there is like a through line story. I mean, I get that, like, maybe this is somebody relating all these different stories to you in different voices and with different, visual styles or whatever, something like that. I don't know, that part of it wasn't me it wasn't like putting it in a box and saying this is what it is, but I think it's kind of interesting that everybody could have a different way of experiencing it.
You see a comic book, the mind immediately assumes there's a story.
Right.
So then we look for one.
Right.
So I was reading the comic books this morning as I was listening to the record, getting ready to talk with you, and I was like, what? What? Wait a minute. What's happening? Are these characters what? And then, and then you look at the other comic book and the two comic books are completely different, different art, different, and it's right. Like, okay. And then I realized I don't get what the story is.
Yeah. lots of little stories. I mean, the comic, and part of the process of me finding other comic book artists was what I was looking for artists who had a distinctive style. Like I said, I've always been a comic book nerd, and I've always, like from when I was a teenager. So I like all the superhero stuff, but I'm kind of sick of it. And that's not what this is. These songs are not about like men with bulging muscles and tight outfits and girls with huge cleavage and like capes, it's like that. Those are not people I hang out with, So I wanted to, every time I saw an artist that had a different take and had a different look, I kind of was like, okay, yeah, let me check that out. And, like you said, the music, it's all from my experience of playing all these different styles of music. So there's a lot of different styles on this album. There's like, heavy glam rock, and then a really like mellow acoustic bass and voice song, and some that are like more African influenced, and some that are just more straight ahead rock or indie rock. So I wanted that to be reflected in the comic style also. And so that's why I was looking for different artists. Like I wanted the visual style to jump around as much as the audio style,
And we're doing this call on video, and I see your beautiful acoustic bass behind you.
Which that wasn't planned. We're just crammed into my studio, so I said there's nowhere else to point the camera. But
it's great. It's wonderful to see, and it's a beautiful instrument. Yeah. And so I guess in a way what the story is this is the story of some of what's inside Ezra Gale.
The songs are definitely characters, but I think that when I write in character, there's at least a little bit of me. There has to be, I have to relate to something in it, and then I can kind of take it a little further. I mean, there's a song called Story Song actually on there that's kind of a story about like a small time drug dealer that's falls in love with like one of his clients. And I was, envisioning a sort of a Breaking Bad-ish kind of storyline there. And that's not me, I should say, but there's a little bit of this kind of like obsessive love maybe, or just kind of a desire to sort of go down a hole with somebody that I can't say I haven't experienced, that's something that I can relate to, that's just so there, everything in it. I think even, there's another comic, the song, The Garden, which is the first song. It was one that I wrote in the beginning of the pandemic, actually, that was really just about me not wanting to leave my house and being like, I just feel like I'm just holding up here. And the way that Luis Santamarina, the artist who drew that, he came back with this mole person who's in in his hobbit hole, and he's like being invaded by all these little people. And I didn't tell him to draw that, but it was so perfect, because that's what I was feeling, like that's so that's not strictly autobiographical, but it's like, yeah, that's a feeling that I have.
Well, all our characters have some parts of ourselves in them.
I think so.
So by now, I think you've gotten the picture, what this music is about, what this double album is about, with 2 comic books that go with it. Highly recommend you check out the Eargoggle at bandcamp.com. It's the eargoggle.bandcamp.com. And you can download the comic books there and read them as you listen to the music. Okay, here's another track from the first disc of the Eargoggle. This one, Ezra just mentioned, Story Song.
Lots of loose talking, but nobody knows. Funny when someone's gone, that's how it goes. It's easy to see when it's all moving slow. Not easy to think when you can't even breathe. She was living like she knew her own needs. That's when her smoky eyes settled on me. Was it my good looks? Was it guaranteed that I have for free what she needed to buy? And oh, that's when things got good for a while. My jokes weren't so funny, but sure made her smile. Stay up till dawn, tangled limb over limb. Just one more, baby, she whisper again. Never intended to feed such a beast. Thought they were good times, her just relief. When you're running, no time to look down. Come to find out, tearing up new ground. To blood, to be sure, we were chasing one more. Hotel rooms no different, looking up from the floor. Things started to stick, just slide out the door. I'd swap myself out in flash, but I know the song we'd be singing at the very same end.
That's Story Song from the first disc of the Eargoggle. It's very sort of jazzy, very different from the first track. So you get a sense of how versatile Ezra is musically. We'll be back with more of my conversation with Ezra Gale, and then one more track from the first disc, and then we'll start listening to music from the second disc, which is very different. Here's Ezra Gale. Life goes through you. Life goes through you. You have experiences, the pandemic, relationships, everything. And then it literally comes through you as something comes out of you. It's, for all of us, especially artists, but we're all creating. And so then the question is sort of like, where am I on my journey? And how is this thing that's coming through me part of my story, part of your story? So I guess I'm asking a little bit, what's your story? Where do you live, and how do you live, and what impacts you, and what do you think and feel about the world? Just to keep it light.
Yeah. Well, I'll be brief, but I've got a family, 2 young kids, and we moved from New York City up to Kingston, New York, a little bit north of the city on the Hudson. We're part of that migration of city folk out of the city during the pandemic, and so trying on the rural life. Now that we can do things remotely, it's been an interesting couple of years, I'll tell you that. So that's part of it. And I lived in California for a long time. I grew up in New York City, lived out in San Francisco for a long time, and moved back, I think about 2010, 29, something around then. Moved back to New York, and I've been here ever since. I've been a working musician since my 20s, I guess, but I'm also a freelance writer. So I do a lot of work with words also. And interestingly enough, hadn't really been a songwriter until really, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I've always written music, but I'd never, and my writing and my music were always separate. For whatever reason, I don't know. I just always left every band I was in. I always left that to somebody else. Like, the singer's going to write the lyrics.
But you've supported yourself with your art.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah,
that's something.
It's something. Of course, now I have a family, and so there's more that goes into that. So I'm, I have to, and my wife has got an actual job, so that helps. But yeah, that's that's something. Doing at least things that are in the ballpark of what I want to do anyway to support myself.
And what are some of your inspirations and also your perceptions that matter most to you about being a human on this earth right now?
I guess I've been thinking a lot lately just about the sort of change, like I just mentioned, big change in my life for the last couple of years, the pandemic, but of course, a big change in society. Positive and negative. Obviously, the part about, people getting sick and dying is a negative, but the part about a lot of us kind of being forced to, at first, I think, sort of look a little bit within ourselves and figure out what it is that we want to do, kind of forced by isolation to do that, at least in the early part of the pandemic. I mean, we were really like kind of locked down and not seeing anybody. And it's odd to say, but it kind of was a beneficial experience in a lot of ways, because I think for me, it was like, this album's kind of a microcosm of sort of how I think about that. It's just, I don't think this album would have happened if I was just living life as before and busy and playing gigs and going on to, whatever appointments and all this other stuff, but not exactly that I had more time when the pandemic happened. I had 2 young kids, so I actually had less time than I've ever had before. But it just sort of forced me to motivate and be more efficient in what I was going to do and what I was going to focus on. And I guess that's something I see on a society-wide level. I mean, everything from employers are finding that workers don't want to work their coffee shop jobs or their fast food jobs. And it's like, well, gosh, maybe they didn't really want to work them before, maybe it's not something anybody wants to do. And now they're realizing they want to do something else. Trends like that I see in my own life, I guess. And I mean, for myself anyway, and for the society at large too, I hope that I and we can sort of sustain that focus on, let's make ourselves better. Let's be more efficient. Let's focus on what we want to do and who we want to become. I think that's partly what I've been thinking about lately.
Certainly the pandemic offered us a big pattern interrupt. And there was that moment at the beginning, animals in cities and clear skies over Mumbai and stuff like that.
Right.
And then we didn't take very long before we, resumed our patterns and the status quo. But it really did show us, it is possible to do this differently.
Right. Yeah. And I think I think we've always known that. I think a lot of us have known that. I think that we just have been on autopilot a lot, and kind of going through the motions of, what this life requires of us. So I think that in that way it's beneficial, and I hope that we can hang on to that more. I'm trying to.
Well, your music has wake up call written all over it. This is not music to snooze by, and this is music to go, what? And that's good. We need those things that are like juxtaposed with the familiar to remind us to not be on autopilot.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And, one of my big intentions for this, as I got into this and it just kind of started growing in ambition, was to create a more active experience for the listener or the viewer. Like I was saying, like there's all these different ways to experience it. And I wanted to make people kind of have more of a role than we normally do when we just put an album on as background music or look at some art, just kind of like whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with putting something on as background music. I do that a lot when I'm in the kitchen or driving, whatever. But it's like there's something to be said for sort of sitting down and experiencing something by itself, and I felt like I at least wanted to have that be an option for this, where there was it's almost like a mechanism for almost forcing us to do that. Because visual art, it's very different than music, I guess, because it's only, music kind of exists all around us. You can do something else while doing it, but visual art, including a comic book, you have to actively, engage with it. Like how much you're thinking about what you're seeing or whatever, I don't know, but it's like a physical thing. So I kind of wanted to see what would happen if you combine those two things. And it's sort of like, you have to pay attention to this now, Yeah. I don't want to turn anybody off of that. I know that that's like sometimes people are like, I don't have time for that. And that's fine, So I hope it works on any level, but I just wanted to have that level available, as part of the experience, I guess.
Well, some of what happened for me listening to it is I thought I'm very visual with music, going to my abstraction. But I really think some of these would be amazing flash mob dance pieces.
I need some TikTok influencers to help me do that, help me bring that off. That would be great.
One of the reasons I like to talk with artists about their creative process on the show is I find it interesting, but I want it to encourage people. Everyone has creativity. Everyone has life going through them and teaching us and giving us things that we can share with others. What do you think about that? How is creativity part of your life? We'd love to see comments about this and what your thoughts are about the music and how you're responding to Ezra. All right, here is one more track from the first disc of the Eargoggle, and then we'll be back with more of my conversation with Ezra Gale and start getting into the second disc. This one's called Tiny Island, and you're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.
On my tiny island, the gathering wind whistles as I climb these spirals up in my lonely eyrie, surrounded by sea. I polish the lenses clear to keep you away through darkness and day. From rocks that lurk underneath, wind the clock spinning round. My heart is my sound. The beam sweeps all that I see. I am polishing light, letting it shine to make you see what I'm standing on. Through bright blues and grays, I mark down the days. Page after page, they all look the same. Yet I don't feel the gloom of fresh painted rooms. Meanwhile the wind breathes and blows and blows. At night the waves crash, still my walls hold fast. Foundation so strong I will carry on. I am polishing light, letting it shine to make you see what I'm standing on. Yes, I'm polishing light, beams cut through the night, warns everyone to steer clear of me. When the tender ship comes with news of my love, supplies me with thread for my tapestry, I sew row upon row while the wind blows, and my tiny island still shelters me.
That's Tiny Island from the first disc of the Eargoggle, a 2-disc set put out by Ezra Gale, my guest on this episode. In case you're just joining us, this 2-record set is accompanied by 2 comic books, original art and story, that go along with this music. Here's the next part of my conversation with Ezra Gale, the Eargoggle. Well, your music has wake-up call written all over it. You know,
Good.
This is not music to snooze by, and this is music to go, what? You know, and that's good. We need those things that are like juxtaposed with the familiar to remind us to not be on autopilot.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And, one of my big intentions for this, as I got into this and it just kind of started growing in ambition, was to create a more active experience for the listener or the viewer. Like I was saying, like there's all these different ways to experience it. And I wanted to make people kind of have more of a role than we normally do when we just put an album on as background music or look at some art, just kind of like whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with putting something on as background music. I do that a lot when I'm in the kitchen or driving, whatever. But it's like there's something to be said for sort of sitting down and experiencing something by itself, and I felt like I at least wanted to have that be an option for this, where there was it's almost like a mechanism for almost forcing us to do that. Because visual art, it's very different than music, I guess, because it's only, music kind of exists all around us. You can do something else while doing it, but visual art, including a comic book, you have to actively, engage with it. Like how much you're thinking about what you're seeing or whatever, I don't know, but it's like a physical thing. So I kind of wanted to see what would happen if you combine those two things. And it's sort of like, you have to pay attention to this now, Yeah. I don't want to turn anybody off of that. I know that that's like sometimes people are like, I don't have time for that. And that's fine, So I hope it works on any level, but I just wanted to have that level available, as part of the experience, I guess.
Well, some of what happened for me listening to it is I thought I'm very visual with music. Going to my abstraction, but I really think some of these would be amazing flash mob dance pieces.
I need some TikTok influencers to help me do that. Help me bring that off. That would be great.
So what's your fantasy of what happens with this? Where do you want this to go? Who do you want to listen to this? Where do you want this double album to?
I guess I'm focused on kind of reaching a sort of crossover with a comic book audience, which I'm not familiar with at all. I mean, I was a comic nerd as a teenager and have followed along ever since, but I'm not like, I don't go to conventions, or I don't even really like superhero movies really. So like, I'm not in that world, but the little contact I have with it, everyone honestly has been really intrigued with this project. That everybody that I've contacted about it, or everybody that's checked it out, they've been like, oh, I haven't ever seen that before. Like, so I think there's room for that to be kind of, something that catches on there. And then the same with the music world that I am more familiar with, kind of combining it with this other element, this visual art element, I think is an interesting thing. And so I'd like to kind of reach out into that. And I guess on a level that's beyond like a self-promotion thing, it would be great if this just kind of inspires people to think differently about what art can do, I guess, about the ways that you can combine different art forms and not have them be so separate. I guess that's kind of where I've ended up with this, thinking about, combining music with other things. For example, like, we know what music and film is like. That's a music video. We know what music and theater is like. That's a musical. That's like, but we don't know what music and art is like, just because it's sort of a trickier combination. It's like I said, like, music exists more abstractly than a piece of art, which is a physical object, that you need to look at. So like, how does that work? How do you make those work together in the way that for example, Hamilton is like music plus scenery and costumes and acting and story and action, and that all combines together to create this thing that we see as a show. How do you do that with music and art, I guess? So I would love, and this is not a selfish or bragging thing, but I haven't seen much in the way of combining these two separate things. A couple of things I've seen, but not really like things that are intended to really go together, I think. And I would like to more. I would just like to kind of spark that.
Well, that's part of what caught my eye. It was like, whoa, this is a really interesting combination of media that are not just paralleling, they're integral, they're integrated, they're part of each other. And there are so many interesting things you could do with it. I mean, I'm imagining a physical comic book that plays the music as you're reading that part, or I'm imagining an animation of that, because these characters are really interesting. So but I think you've discovered a new rabbit hole.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't imagine you'll get stuck in it, because you have so many other musical and artistic directions.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on, but you're right. And it's interesting. Part of what I always loved about comics, and also part of why I'm not really into all the superhero movies that have come out, is what I loved about comics originally was that so much of it was up to us as we read it. Like, I know that there's pictures and art, but I always had a kind of an environment in my mind while I read the X-Men or whatever. Like, I knew what Wolverine sounded like, and when I saw the movies, I was like, that's not what he sounds like, even though now that's what everybody thinks he sounds like, Hugh Jackman, because that's in the movie. Right. But like, to me, that's part of what I loved about comic books, was like, you could enter this world and it inspired you to enter that world, but it wasn't really dictating exactly all the things about that world, like how it sounded, for example. So I think there's a lot of room to play around with that and kind of explore that.
Here's a track from disc 2 of this double album set, The Eargoggle by Ezra Gale. This one is called Leave No Trace.
Maybe you're from outer space. You give me
That's Leave No Trace from the second disc of this double album set, The Eargoggle. Here is the next part of my conversation with the artist, Ezra Gale. It's true, especially with the superhero movies, which are really a phenomenon now. They eliminate all need for the viewer to have any imagination at all.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And most the big films now that are where the main star really is the special effects,
Right.
They don't encourage imagination. They just feed you this thing. And, you know, I'm not knocking it. It's fun in its own way. But there is something really essential about humans imagining the ineffable, imagining in ways in our minds that we can't even communicate, but it's real for us. That's important. The inner world is very important.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You know, and to me, it's always been more powerful than being a receptor, you know. The comics are really a great example of that. Is like the inner world that I had in my head around reading those books was much more interesting than, you know, what they've created on screen so far, which is not to knock movies as an art form. It's just like, you know, translating it from one to the other. I think that's what gets lost about that. So I would like to explore that more. I mean, animation is interesting because that's the logical sort of next step for this would be to animate some of these stories and see what happens with that. So
what a venture.
Yeah. But I've already moved. I'm already working on, I have another project now that's started with this one, which is more of a rock opera concept album. And then that with a graphic novel, so that's one story all the way through, and then the same two artists are working on that. But so that's kind of following up this, but just kind of doubling down on the story aspect to extend that a little more.
So in some ways, this is an on-ramp.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
I mean, you don't want this to be your only, maybe you do, but, you know, sometimes people are like, you know, I had a hit, now I have to sing that song every night and I'm sick of it, you know, and you have so many different creative expressions. So I don't imagine you want to only do the Eargoggle, but at the same time.
Partly of my idea with it from the start has just been like, it's not the only thing I'm doing, but if it was, I want to make it interesting enough so that I wouldn't get bored. You know, I can put everything into this and have that work. You know, I always move through these creative projects and then kind of move on to something. But like, and now, you know, this comic book thing has really gotten my interest of combining music and art like this. So I don't know how long this will last, but one thing I would really like to kind of integrate more is having, because this one was very much music first, in that I wrote the songs first and then sought out the artists to kind of illustrate what they heard in the songs and their interpretation of it. But I would love to work the other way and kind of like take the art first maybe and try and write songs about that, or work with an artist to develop them at the same time. I think that would be pretty interesting.
Well, with the new project, the rock opera, I mean, you start with a libretto, you have to have a story, right?
Yeah. So it's a story. The music, I mean, it kind of is also, the music was done first, although I did have a more specific images in mind because it's all a story and I had to fit everything into that, than this one, which was completely like sending the song and the lyrics to the artist and saying, okay, go for it. You know, whatever you do is fine. This one is more, okay, this is what's happening here. You know, he needs to, he needs to get an argument with his dad right now and storm out of the room. Like that's what's happening in the song, you know.
This is tapas. That's going to be a really full integrated.
That's movie. A full meal. That's great. I love it.
I can't wait to see it, because I really get the feeling you're on. Not only are you onto something in general in terms of form, but you are onto something with yourself that you're going to be following, and who knows where it's going to lead you.
It could be. I mean, and the other thing, you know, the last batch of songs I wrote, I started experimenting with writing short stories to go along with every song, and that one I started with it worked both ways, but a lot of them I wrote the story first and then wrote a song from that, just to kind of explore that sort of, and I don't know what'll happen with that project, but that's like that's two projects from now, I guess. But anyway, just exploring going both ways with this kind of, I don't know if it's synergy or like what, you know, both ways with this back and forth between these art forms.
We're going to listen to another track from the second disc of the Eargoggle, and then we'll be back with the final part of my conversation with Ezra Gale. This one's called The Bureau of Everything.
For the first time in human history, it's both technologically and financially feasible for governments to track and store nearly complete records of our private lives. One guy sitting in front of a monitor can track with precision an unimaginably large number of people. Now, this is not science fiction. This is happening now. There's a system that's watching everything you do. We are witnessing the construction of a world which the most common political value is fear.
We are the bureau of everything. We watch you work and we watch you sing. Your love is deep, but so is our ring. We are the bureau of everything.
Corporate or governmental control of this permanent record of all of our private lives that's being created every day by the devices that we have. There's a system that's watching everything you do. The government is collecting records of every phone call in the United States. Everything that you've ever typed into that search box. Every private message that you sent on Facebook, every link that you clicked, everything that you liked, they keep permanent records of.
We are the bureau of everything. We watch you work and we watch you sing. Your love is deep, but so is our ring. We are the bureau of everything. We are the bureau of everything. Stop with it all. We watch you work and we watch you sing. Stop with it all. Your love is deep, but so is our ring. Stop with it all. We are the bureau of everything.
These programs are about power. Who's connected to who? What this is really about is this is about liberty versus surveillance. As they sell these, as they trade these, as they make their businesses on the backs of these records, what they are selling is not information. What they are selling is us.
We are the bureau of everything. We watch you work and we watch you sing. Your love is deep, but so is our ring. We are the bureau of everything. We are the bureau of everything. Stop with it all. We watch you work and we watch you sing. Stop with it all. Your love is deep, but so is our ring. Stop with it all. We are the bureau of everything. Don't stop with it all.
That's the Bureau of Everything. And now here's the final part of my conversation with Ezra Gale. You know, years ago, Ursula Le Guin put out a book. It was a novel, and it had an audio cassette with it. I can't remember the name, but it was the story, the book, and then the audio had music that went along with the society she had written about.
Cool.
It was the music of the people she wrote about in the book.
Oh, cool. I got to seek that out. Wow.
And that was maybe in the 80s or 90s.
Right.
And honest to God, since then, maybe people are doing it. I haven't seen anything like this until you.
Right. Yeah, I've been looking. I mean, and like I said, it's not like a bragging thing. It's like actually as a consumer, as a listener, like I want to check something like this out. Like, so I've been looking around and I haven't really found much. So,
well, you know what they say, if you can't find it, you got to make it.
That's right. Yeah.
So you made it.
But, there was a friend of mine named Carla Boslich, who I was hanging out with years and years ago. I remember she said, if you're not in your own favorite band, why bother? And I've kind of lived according to that ever since then. I was like, that's the perfect way. That's the music I'm making. I'm making the music that I want to listen to. I hope somebody else likes it. I really do, but I'm not going to change it really. I mean,
Right.
So
you're not doing this to make a product.
No, not really. I mean, it ends up as one, which I brought props. I should show off the product since we're talking products. But here's the actual double record there, and then
nice.
Yeah, it's beautiful art.
Very nice.
And then here's the this is the comic, which is it's a flip. So this is the Ravel's record, and then this is the Regale.
I love
books up, and you read them both, from each side.
That's brilliant.
So speaking of product,
yeah. No, Ezra, you're looks like you're having fun.
It is fun. It's a lot of work, but it's it's I can't think of anything else I'd like to put work into. So
I love getting that kind of a message out to folks that you can have fun with your work.
It's possible.
Wow.
Yeah. I hope people check out the Bandcamp link. That's the place to get it. I did a Kickstarter for it, which was kind of how I funded it, which I'd never done before, and that was a whole interesting experience. Good and bad. It was good. It was successful, so it was ultimately good, but just a very consuming experience, but beneficial, I think, for artists in some ways, because it's very focused. It makes you kind of tighten up and learn how to present what this project is. I think if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to, for example, explain to you as much what this is, and what my idea was behind it. I hadn't really thought about that in that way. So it was actually, aside from raising money, it was actually, I think, a good thing to go through.
Yeah, the crowdfunding phenomenon is really interesting. I love that it creates community.
Yeah.
But for anyone who wants to do one, you don't just put up the site and sit there. It's not passive. You have to communicate with your people who are donating.
Yeah, you got to
work the momentum, because otherwise it just goes flat.
Oh yeah, no, and there's a lot of examples of that, of people who think that they're whatever it is so amazing that people are just going to gravitate towards it, and it's not. And I think you have to embrace that and be creative with it, which I was able to. Not that it was all roses, but a lot of people kind of have the inclination of like, I don't want to deal with all that, at least in my world. I mean, in the musician world, where a lot of musicians are just, they don't want to deal with the promotion or anything of that. They just want to play music. Totally get it. But if you have an artistic project of yours, it's like, it does require more of you. And ultimately, I guess what I found was that it benefited me in ways other than just getting the project off the ground. It really kind of like helped me pull together what this is in my mind and kind of organize it in a way that I don't think I would have been able to otherwise.
And I love your Peter Max.
Yeah. But this is actually the Doc Ellis LSD no-hitter shirt. I should show you the whole thing.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
so it's Peter Max.
Peter Max style, yeah. But yeah, this is
very cool.
Yeah. Facebook knows me, and so it feeds me the ads for psychedelic baseball shirts.
Oh, of course. Well, Ezra, this is fun, and I think what you're doing is fun, and I can't wait to see the next thing.
Thank you so much.
The rock opera.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for talking with me and for doing this creative work.
This was great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Ezra Gale, thank you so much for talking with me. I really enjoyed it. What an interesting person. You do so many cool things musically and artistically. Ezra is a great example of a person who goes for it. If you have creative ideas, go for it. Definitely check out Ezra's Bandcamp page with the Eargoggle in its entirety. The Eargoggle, TheEargoggle.bandcamp.com. This album is also available as a double vinyl set with the 2 comic books, of course. And if you enjoyed this episode of Paradigms, I hope you'll check out our archive at the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, and in iTunes and wherever else you find your podcasts. Paradigms now has a YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and look for Paradigms Podcast. Paradigms has a Patreon campaign going. We appreciate our Patreon sponsors so much. Patreon.com/paradigms. Please check it out. Thank you. We all go through our days, we do our lives, we do our work, we communicate with family and friends, and some folks feel really isolated, some folks are more connected with others, but the bottom line is we are all here on this earth together now. Humans have a long history of creating suffering for ourselves and for the other life forms on the planet, and we haven't stopped. Maybe we're developing enough awareness to realize that we can. We don't have to do it this way. We don't have to do war. We don't have to do oppressive politics. We don't have to let hate and division be our mainstays. We really don't. I'm hoping very much every day that creativity and music and the beauty of nature and just the amazingness of life itself will be enough to inspire increasingly humanity to be kind, to be better. As Matthew Fox said, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. So let's all work on this together, shall we? All right. We're going to close out this episode with one more song from the second disc of the Eargoggle double album set. It's the final track, and it's called Arambepi. I hope you enjoy it. And let the word for the week be creativity. Acknowledge your own. Notice it in those around you. Practice being creative. We're creative all the time. Every breath is a creative act, but we can take it much further than that. Creativity. All right, Baruch signing off for another episode of Paradigms. We'll be back next time with more inspiring people. Until then, be well.
Of Night of Light from Arambepi, Brazil. The men went fishing all the day. The women cared the children, elders, others working their condiment. Generators kept the fish to be fresh. But villagers kept away the electric lights. At dusk, the fishermen sat at tables and candles. They faced the windows on the alleys and presided at dinner into darkness, tapped on the windows. Rum in the bar was kept under stars. Later women came, they hung, and pairs were made that drifted into the alleys. Their breaths to words and breathless moanings were heard in deep spell of cosmic sensory. My first night, a Brazilian stood me in the alley, outside the bar, reciting simples in the southern sky. Candles only kindled that night, that manipulated darkness out of sight. The ground for warming spirit, To see the stars and further into the ancient dances, reflected from Earth, in return more lighted cosmos, gentle to a lowest candle. Powered universally, the star to be in every cosmic corner, as day by night offer darkness to brightly be the nightly more. But our Bevi's yesteryear is now over. Factor, refining titanium oxide. Open darkness, open light. Beyond the civil moments that were our heavens.
You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.